human beings. We literally die. And one of the ways we first got wind of the fact that the social condition is the only condition in which a decent life can be sustained is when we learned why children died in orphanages. There were studies of orphanages earlier in the 20th century. Our fodder, it's typical in universities, it might still be in this one, where freshmen in psychology classes, as part of their introductory course, are required to participate in an experiment. And this gave us the human power to keep learning through putting people in odd and unusual situations. And one of those, you're reading a number of those for this week's readings, and one of them is this thing, the Ash experiment. And I have some YouTube interactional dependence. We do care what other people think because they are, and I'm going to talk more about this in a subsequent class, they are fundamental to our capacity to have a sense of self, to have an identity, to have anything like a comfortable personality, a legitimacy in the world, a capacity to self-reflect, to have an identity that makes any sense, to be mentally healthy. So, that kind of authority structure. The authority being the fact that, at least in some of the experimental settings, the person who's asking them to pull the switch, and of course he's asking them to pull the switch in a plausible way. These are, there are people named Stanley Milgram. And what Milgram did, and you all know this from your readings, is he put people in a room where they were told to pull the switch to deliver electrical shocks to someone who they thought was an innocent person just like them, who was actually a stooge working for the experimenter. And again, the thing about it. One of the things that I noticed is that before he gives the wrong answer, the right answer for the group, he hesitates. And that hesitation, we're also going to talk about things like hesitation later in the course. That hesitation is a kind of telltale that he is suffering from what social psychologists often call cross pressures, a kind of damned if you do and damned if you don't. You're stymied, you're kind of right in the middle. And as these experiments evolve, that kind of stymie is what you see again and again. Before then, look at that, isn't that amazing? Some people never shock, never conform. Isn't it amazing that if you just have one ally, your degree of shocking goes down. If you have two allies, your degree of conformity goes way down. Well, that's one way of looking at it. That instead, mostly people look at it and say, this is certainly enough conformity to, for example, launch the Nazis. We've got enough going here for that, and perhaps that means that the United States itself consists of people who are vulnerable to something like fascism and might join it, and indeed join it with some degree of enthusiasm. Of the ultimate high-end shocks, that's 35% in this version of the summary, all the way down to only 10% do the shock when they have confederates. That is, when they think other people are refusing to shock, then they refuse to shock. We start getting, in effect, the basis of to join them. It solidifies their position. And that's one of the reasons why so many of us, all things equal, like to have a special person in our lives. You and me. He held in the government. a few people, only a few people, know who Robert McNamara was. There he is identified as the architect of the Vietnam War. Robert McNamara was one of the people called one of the whiz kids, people who were going to remake American industry. He was the president of the Ford Corporation, Ford Cars, first member, I believe, first person to be that who was not a member of the Ford family of people, as opposed to Ford family of cars. And he lost faith in the war. He could see that, in fact, our military experts were wrong, that the body counts, which was the number of people we were killing, was made up. Shocking. That's the idea. That is, if you go through this experience and you suffer the tension involved in having to choose between obeying authority and shocking a human being, and then know that you chose the shocking one, that maybe this does psychological damage to you. And so we can't, and in fact I should mention to you that that the reason we have these committees that must approve the research we do if it involves human subjects is precisely because of the Milgram experiment. The Milgram experiment is the poster boy of abusing people in social psychological experiments, and they allow you to do that. The same way with hanging out with the boys at the school, knowing the way they're breaking the law, that they're driving drunk, and just hanging out like that, that would be quite hard to bring off for an adult male in this day and age. But at a more innocent time, Chambliss. First names, is that people, when they think they're acting on their own, when they think they're choosing a name for their child out of their own imaginations and tastes and sensibilities, are actually conforming. They're part of some larger circle of influences that are coming down upon them, that are surrounding them. And sometimes when American Jews started naming their children not Chaim and Solomon, but named their children things like Morton and Marvin, they think they are acting on their own. They are, but in this case, to what they take to be African Americanism or something like that. And together with these other people, they like the name Denisha, Letitia, or whatever it might be, and in that way they are innovating, because African Americans did not used to have those names, and indeed, as far as I know, no Americans used to have those names. They're innovating, but they're not just choosing the names out of the blue. They're not just choosing the names because they like them. They are choosing the names in light of what other people who are up to the same thing are doing. And so they're conforming. Boys. One of the underlying forces, which I'm bringing your attention to more so than Chambliss did, is the way in which these boys are different from each other. That is, that these boys, some of them do get a kick from driving in cars, from being drunk, and some of the boys, and that's the upper middle class boys, and the lower middle class boys get a kick out of different things. They get a kick out of the way they stand, like tough boys, talking back to authority, and the occasional maybe act of theft or robbery. The boy big way. It isn't about that the middle class boys are conforming to society and the working class boys are not conforming. Both sets of boys are conforming. They're just conforming to different subcultures. And that's pretty much the same. You are finding people with whom you feel solidarity, and so you take up the lifestyle and the ways of being a daredevil, the ways of conforming. In the case of the working class boys, physical fighting with each other, which the higher class boys never do. That's nothing that they do. But in order to you will operate. And of course, the conditions of life are social class, for example. And this condition then pushes people, nudges people toward one way of being as opposed to another way of being. But what I want to emphasize again and again is the fact that the conformity, that process, is natural, inevitable, and happens in all these different kinds of settings. The Asch experiment, the Milgram experiment, the White House with Robert McNamara in charge. People don't. So just to conform, it's to conform. It's a profound process, a profoundly important process, which has its base in what it is to be human and to be socially involved in other people's lives and to see how they see the world is the way you see the world and hence act accordingly. The way to get dignity in any situation, whether it's the White House cabinet room or it's on the street corner, the route to dignity is to display your allegiance, your lining up with other people who are like you and who make you able to have some dignity in the world. So, what I've tried to society and work their lives in somewhat of a different way. Now, Chambliss is paying a lot of attention here to social class and to the labeling process, something we'll talk about more in a future lecture, to the labeling process that labels one group as boys who are no good, the other group as boys who are just fine, even though both groups of boys are doing many things that are not good at all, and that could be classified as delinquent. Quite a preoccupation, by the way, earlier in the